I never thought I'd be that person posting a crazy HOA story on Reddit. Some background: my wife and I have lived in our home for 5 years. The neighborhood is nice, mostly quiet, and until recently the HOA was reasonable. They'd send out seasonal reminders about yard maintenance and holiday decorations, but nothing aggressive. That all changed 3 months ago when we got new board members. Enter Cora, Charles, and Tucker, our new HOA nightmare team. Cora, especially, seems to think she's running a military operation instead of a suburban neighborhood. The problem started small, like most HOA horror stories do. First came the notices about our grass being 0.25 inches too tall. Yes, you read that right, 1/4 of an inch. Then complaints about our garden hose being visible from the street. It wasn't. And our trash bins being brought in 15 minutes past the designated time. I was stuck in traffic. But today? Today they crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I was working from home when I heard voices in my backyard. Not just near it, in it. I looked out my office window and saw Cora, Charles, and Tucker walking around my property with clipboards and taking photos. They hadn't knocked, hadn't called, hadn't even sent one of their precious notices. They were just there. I went outside immediately. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Cora turned around with that classic Karen smile. "Oh, good, you're home. We're conducting our quarterly property inspection." Without notice? Without permission? I was trying to keep my cool, but my blood was already boiling. As per bylaw 47.3, Charles chimed in, reading from his clipboard like he was reciting scripture. The HOA board reserves the right to inspect properties for compliance at any time. "That's for the front yard and external facades," I said. "You need permission and 48 hours notice for private property access. I have the bylaws too." Tucker at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Cora and Charles? They acted like I was speaking a foreign language. "We've had complaints," Cora said, walking closer to my back door. "Your herb garden might be violating Section 12 about edible plants visible from common areas." I stepped between them and my door. "Leave! Now, this is trespassing." "We have authority," Charles started, reaching for my door handle. That's when I lost it. Not in a rage way, but in a this ends now way. As Charles tried to push past me, I grabbed his collar and shoulder, using his own momentum to put him on the ground. Not hard, but firmly enough to make my point. He landed with an oof that was more surprised than hurt. Cora started screaming about assault, and Tucker just stood there with his mouth open. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 right in front of them. "I'm reporting trespassers on my property who are refusing to leave," I said clearly, both to the dispatcher and to make sure they heard me. One tried to force entry into my home. The police arrived surprisingly quickly. Guess it was a slow day. By then, Charles had picked himself up and was standing with the others near our fire pit, all of them filming me with their phones like they'd caught some rare animal at the zoo. The best part? My security cameras caught everything. The unauthorized entry, them wandering around, Charles trying to enter my home, and my reasonable response to protect my property. The officers reviewed the footage right there on my phone. You should have seen Cora's face when the officer told them they were indeed trespassing and could face charges if I wanted to pursue them. Charles tried to press charges against me, but the officer shut that down fast after seeing the video. They left with a warning, but this isn't over. Cora was already on her phone as they walked away, probably calling whoever she thinks can fix this for her. I've uploaded all the security footage to cloud storage and sent copies to my email. I'm waiting for the fallout, but I won't back down. My wife gets home in an hour, and I know she'll support me, but I'm worried about retaliation. These people have already shown they don't care about boundaries or laws. I'll update when there's more to share. For now, I'm just glad I installed those security cameras last year after the Porch Pirates incident. Never thought I'd need them for this. Edit. Thank you for all the awards and support. To answer some common questions. Yes, I have cameras covering all angles of my property. No, I'm not moving. This is our home. Yes, I'll be speaking with a lawyer tomorrow morning. Yes, I made sure Charles was okay before he got up. I'm not trying to hurt anyone, just protect my property. Edit 2. Several people have asked about the herb garden. It's a small raised bed with basil, thyme, and mint. It's not visible unless you're literally in my backyard, which they shouldn't have been. Update. Yesterday morning, I woke up to find a certified letter in my mailbox. Inside was a formal notice from the HOA board, signed by Cora, of course, demanding I appear before them for an emergency disciplinary hearing. The letter listed multiple violations, including aggressive behavior towards board members, obstruction of official HOA business, and my personal favorite, unauthorized modifications to approved landscaping, they're still hung up on my herb garden. But here's where it gets interesting. While I was reviewing the security footage again to send to my lawyer, I noticed something I missed the first time. Before they entered my backyard, the footage shows Cora and Charles having an animated discussion with my neighbor Lydia. She was clearly upset, gesturing at her own yard, and Cora was doing that patronizing head pat thing while Charles took notes. I decided to talk to Lydia. Turns out they'd been harassing her too, threatening fines over her non-approved rose bushes that have been there for 12 years. But the real kicker? They told her they'd overlook the violations if she signed a statement supporting their new property maintenance initiative. While we were talking, another neighbor, Vivian, came over. She overheard us and shared her own story. They'd tried to fine her $500 for having a bird feeder that was attracting unauthorized wildlife. When she refused to pay, they started taking photos of her house daily, claiming they were documenting ongoing violations. My wife suggested we create a neighborhood group chat to see how widespread this was. Within hours, we had dozens of messages from neighbors sharing similar experiences. Tucker, the third board member, had been to some properties alone, appearing uncomfortable and apologetic while taking photos. Several people mentioned he'd quietly suggested they just comply for now to avoid trouble. This morning, things escalated further. I received another certified letter, this time from a law firm representing the HOA. They're threatening legal action for physical assault on Charles, interfering with HOA operations, multiple property violations, inciting community discord. Apparently, our group chat counts as this. They're demanding I pay a $2,500 fine, submit a formal written apology, grant them immediate access to inspect my property, cease all unauthorized communications about HOA matters. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who actually laughed. She's already requested all HOA financial records and board meeting minutes from the past year. Apparently, some of their demands aren't even legal under state HOA regulations. The most surprising development came this afternoon. I was outside checking my mail when Roman, a former board member who stepped down last year, approached me. He seemed nervous but determined. "Look," he said, glancing around, "there's something you should know about Cora and Charles. When I was on the board, they tried to join but were rejected because of their behavior in their previous neighborhood's HOA. They're doing the same thing here they did there, creating violations to force people to sell." He showed me some old emails on his phone. Apparently, their previous neighborhood had several houses sell below market value after months of HOA harassment. Interestingly, all were bought by the same real estate investment group. I'm meeting with my lawyer again tomorrow. She's already gotten calls from 3 other neighbors wanting to join any potential legal action. The HOA's annual meeting is in 2 weeks, and traditionally they announce the next year's board nominees there. I have a feeling it's going to be more exciting than usual. Edit. Several people asked about the security cameras. They're standard home security cameras, nothing fancy, but they record audio and have night vision. Best investment I ever made. Edit 2. To the person who asked, yes, I've backed up all the footage and documents to multiple locations. I'm not taking any chances. Edit 3. Just got another text from Tucker. Cora's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. He says she's really angry about the neighborhood group chat. I'll update when I know more. Second update. Well, the emergency board meeting happened last night, and it was absolute chaos. Not the productive kind either. We're talking full-on suburban warfare. First, some quick updates from my last post. Tucker provided his written statement as promised. My lawyer had begun reviewing the HOA's financial records, and our neighborhood group chat had grown to include most of the community, but none of us were prepared for what happened at the meeting. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in our community center. By 6:30, the parking lot was packed. I've never seen so many neighbors turn up for an HOA meeting. Usually it's just the board and maybe 5 other people. This time, standing room only. Cora opened the meeting with her usual fake smile, but you could see she was rattled by the turnout. Charles sat next to her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, while Tucker kept checking his phone, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Before we begin," Cora announced, "I want to address the inappropriate and potentially libelous discussions happening in unauthorized social media groups." That's when Vivian stood up. "You mean the group where we're sharing evidence of your harassment?" Cora's face went red. "That group is spreading misleading information and—" "Like the misleading information about my rose bushes?" Lydia interrupted, standing up too. "The ones that were approved by the previous board?" Charles tried to take control. We're following HOA bylaws to maintain property values. That's when Roman, our former board member, stepped forward with a stack of papers. Really? Like you did in Quartz Lakes? He started passing out copies of emails and documents from their previous neighborhood. Before you both mysteriously left that HOA board, the room erupted. Neighbors were standing up, sharing stories of harassment, showing photos of violations that weren't violations at all. One elderly resident couldn't hold back tears as she described how Cora had threatened to fine her $100 per day for her grandson's battery-powered wheelchair ramp. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source. Remember Tucker's phone checking? Turns out he wasn't being antisocial. He was recording everything. He stood up, hands shaking, and played an audio recording from a private board meeting 2 weeks ago. In the recording, Cora and Charles discussed their strategy for forcing compliance. They talked about targeting specific homes, especially those owned by elderly residents or single parents who might not have the resources to fight back. They even joked about how easy it was to invent violations when people didn't know the bylaws well enough to challenge them. The room went dead silent during the playback. When it finished, Cora launched into a tirade about illegal recordings and breach of confidence. Charles tried to grab Tucker's phone, leading to a brief scuffle that ended with Charles falling over a chair. That's when Alyssa, who sits on the city council but was there as a resident, spoke up. She explained that under state law, we could vote to suspend board members pending an investigation if we had enough homeowners present. We did. The vote wasn't even close. Out of 87 homeowners present, 82 voted to suspend Cora and Charles. Even some of their former supporters turned on them after hearing the recording. Tucker was spared from suspension after several residents spoke up about how he'd helped them quietly navigate around Cora's demands. But here's where it gets even better. During the chaos, my wife noticed something odd about the financial documents my lawyer had obtained. She's good with numbers, unlike me, and she spotted irregular payments to a property management consultant that started right after Cora and Charles joined the board. The company name matched the real estate investment group Roman had mentioned. Cora and Charles stormed out before we could ask about it, but not before Cora turned and screamed that we'd regret this, and that her connections would ensure we never sold our homes for proper value. The interim board, quickly elected last night, is already working with my lawyer to investigate everything. Elias, a retired resident who's lived here for 20 years, is serving as temporary board president. He's already started the process of reviewing and potentially reversing all fines issued in the past 3 months. This morning, we woke up to find all the violation notices had been torn off everyone's doors, dozens of them scattered across lawns and driveways. Security cameras caught Cora doing it at 3 a.m., screaming about ungrateful residents while Charles tried to calm her down. The police just left after taking statements about the overnight vandalism. They seemed particularly interested in the fact that Cora had used a master key to access the community center's bulletin board and remove all posted notices about the emergency meeting results. Final update. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I wanted to wait until everything was properly resolved before posting this final update. After the emergency meeting and suspension of Cora and Charles, things were tense but quiet for a few days. The interim board, led by Elias, started reviewing all the questionable fines and violations. Tucker's cooperation helped tremendously in understanding what had really been going on. Then last Thursday happened. I was walking my dog around 9 p.m. when I noticed some activity at our community center. Through the windows, I could see Cora and Charles inside, going through filing cabinets. Since they'd been suspended from the board, they weren't supposed to have access to those records anymore. I called Elias immediately and started recording on my phone. When they came out and saw me, Cora's face twisted into that familiar sneer. "Still playing neighborhood watchdog?" she spat, clutching a folder to her chest. I kept my distance, phone clearly recording. "The interim board revoked your access. You need to leave those files." Charles started walking toward me, trying to look intimidating. "Give me the phone, now." Remember how I mentioned in my first post about putting him on the ground when he tried to enter my house? Well, Charles apparently hadn't learned his lesson. He lunged for my phone, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped and he stumbled past me. My dog, usually the friendliest golden retriever you'll ever meet, started barking like crazy. Cora started yelling about how we were ruining the neighborhood with our lack of standards and how property values would plummet without proper enforcement. She tried to push past me to leave with the files, but I blocked the doorway. That's when she swung her purse at my head. I caught her wrist, and the files scattered everywhere. Elias arrived with several other neighbors just as Charles tried to grab me from behind. My dog got between us, growling in a way I'd never heard before. The sight of multiple neighbors with phones recording finally made them back down. The police arrived shortly after. After reviewing the community center's security footage and taking statements, they charged Cora and Charles with simple assault and trespassing. The files they were trying to take? Just routine violation notices and fine records. They were probably trying to cover their tracks about their selective enforcement. The aftermath has been surprisingly positive. New permanent board elected Elias as president, Alyssa as vice president. All questionable fines from the past 3 months reviewed and most refunded. Security cameras installed throughout common areas. Monthly board meetings now recorded and minutes posted online. New bylaws requiring 2 board members to verify violations before notices are issued. My dog got extra treats. He earned them. Remember the elderly resident with the grandson's wheelchair ramp? The new board's first official act was to approve permanent accessibility modifications for any resident who needs them. They also established a resident review committee to look at violation notices before they're issued. Cora and Charles ended up moving out of the neighborhood last week. Turns out their own house had several violations they'd been ignoring. Karma, I guess. They took a small hit on the sale price, ironically because of the documented issues they'd refused to fix while serving on the board. The neighborhood has changed, in a good way. People actually talk to each other now. We had our first community cookout last weekend. Lydia's roses are blooming beautifully. Edit. Several people asked about legal consequences. Cora and Charles both got community service and small fines for the assault attempt. The new board also required them to pay back all the improper fines they'd issued before they could sell their house.